have a chance, if you haven't already, buy some books. It's what lets us keep having these for free. It's what supports our wonderful authors who come to speak with us. And another book is always a good thing to have. I also want to start out just by thanking our co-sponsors for the event, the Wright Center for Computation and Just Communities, and the Institute for Black Intellectual and Cultural Life at Dartmouth College. We are very, very lucky to have with us tonight the lauded legal scholar Patricia Williams, who's here to discuss her new book, The Miracle of the Black Leg, which is a collection of essays exploring the collisions and the interconnections of history, law, and identity. And here to discuss the book with her is the director of the Wright Center, Susan Brison. Please join me in welcoming both our guests for tonight. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Can we maybe move this back? Are you going to use it?
No, I mean, maybe a small person would be standing.
Yeah, just so we can see each other a little bit better. So,
This is much better.
so we can move this down a little bit.
Yeah.
Got it?
Oh, no. I don't want to lock me in here. But for some reason, it's not turning. Sound person? No, that's not doing anything. Can we lower the booms so they don't block the views of...
And hit their mouths.
It's just cutting off eye contact with the first and second row.
Come on.
Oh, you're just going to do that. I was trying to get this to go down.
Oh, yes. Let's see. We move that a little over this way.
Sorry.
Got a little bit better?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll just do it. How did this get moved?
No, it's
This is not like my mic stand. There we go. There it is. Got it. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry about all that.
Just leave that up there.
it's the
Is it on?
it's this part that you
Yeah.
unscrew and
I know.
it goes down.
You'd think I would be strong enough to do it after all my CrossFit, but I'm gonna leave it like this. Is this on for you back there?
No.
Well, it's for them. Whoever is filming this for some purpose, for posterity.
It's good.
Okay. I have to say a few words. I'm just utterly thrilled that Patricia Williams chose to launch this exquisite book here with us. I mean, you could have done this anywhere, any major city, and she chose the Upper Valley of the Norwich Bookstore. And I encouraged her to start with the reading because her prose is just so gorgeous, and we want to hear it. And then I have a couple of questions to ask, but we'll leave time for you to ask questions too.
Could you speak up? It's not on.
Yeah.
What? So there's no speaker with this, right?
Speaker's right here.
I'm sorry, who's doing the sound here? No, you're not. Could
I don't
somebody
know. I don't
ask?
think
Oh,
so.
this
but
is
it-
main level.
I don't hear it.
Try it.
Testing, testing. I don't think it's on. I think it's just for the... Could somebody ask? Thanks. Sorry, we can project.
Yes, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's fine.
We can project.
Yeah, I don't know how that works for the recording, but I just wanted to say what a delight it is to be here and to see. I'm shocked because, as you say, I'm in an unfamiliar territory. I think I've been to the last time I was really here or spent any time aside from like a day dropping in for a conference was maybe in 1989 when I was here for the School of Criticism and Theory. And I spent the whole summer here. That's where I think I met Susan at that point, or at least it was a year. Oh, great.
Okay, now, whoa. Okay, just down a little bit. Down a little bit, or we'll modify it. But it might be unidirectional too, so you might have to point it at you.
And it's sometime within those years, the late 1980s, early 1990s, when I had sort of given up on law schools. the law as a general category and decided I was going to go back to school and get a PhD in comparative literature, which I did not. Instead, I wrote my misery out all summer long. And that misery became my first book, The Alchemy of Race and Rights, which in this weirdly ironical way became popular among law faculty and law students in particular, and dragged me back into law schools. It legitimized me in the most upside down of senses. And I've been in a law school ever since, but my connections have been interdisciplinary, which is, you know, how I ended up at Columbia, connecting with I'm delighted to see Marianne Hirsch here. It's how I ended up doing a fellowship at Radcliffe, where I met, you know, somebody completely outside my discipline, but with whom I found common cause. Jane Lipson in the thermodynamics department, and reconnected over the years in a series of encounters, in some very serious discussions along the way around Susan, around her book. I was so pleased to see that the second edition of her book has my little prayer of endorsement for her book Aftermath, and it's such a delight to be here and to be among you. So I thought I would, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to read you a sort of condensation, a very quick condensation of what it is that really inspired this book, because you see that it was inspired by a painting that I saw that a student brought to me, and it was so mysterious to me. It's a picture of, what you'll see up here are two saints, and I could sort of divine that simply from not knowing anything else, that these were clearly saints, and if you see the actual full painting, they trimmed it somewhat. They have halos on, but they're the objects of veneration in this Renaissance painting, whose title is unknown, and whose artist is unknown, but it's in an Italian museum on loan from an unnamed donor. And so I don't know much more about the provenance of the painting, I'm sorry. You'll see here a patient on a bed with the unlikely image or vision of a black leg sewed onto a white body at a moment when, for me, the image was, one of the immediate image was there was no anesthesia in those days. This must be very painful. And then the eye slowly sort of carried downward by the flow of the red of the composition itself takes you down, and many people simply see this painting and don't see the black body at the bottom of the painting. And the expired body at the bottom with clearly only part of one leg. You can see where the amputation has occurred. And so it took me quite a while, and here I'm paraphrasing what I wrote in the first part of it, to let my mind wander about what the significance of this was. That it was clearly done at a time where the concept of race doesn't have the same significance as it might today. So I couldn't flatly say that this is about blackness and whiteness. It isn't simply about the privileging of one body over the expired body at the bottom. But it did make me feel that there was some sense of a privileging of, the conceptual, the spiritual at the top, the application of something like early medicine, or as I thought of it as a kind of galvanism, that there was something about the resurrection of the body through this kind of amputation, or through the suturing of one body with the other. And then, literally by the composition, the placement of the black body at the bottom, expired, needed explanation in my mind. And I didn't know where to put it in my sense of religious history or anything else. And apparently, ultimately, I finally found an art historian who was familiar with this, because this is not a popular image in Roman Catholicism, but it's a very well-known image in Eastern Orthodoxy. And it's the twin unsilvered or unmercenary saints, Cosmas and Damian. They were early doctors, and they were rumored to have done some of the first amputations, and again, that did not do away with any of my concern of the pain involved. But this is either the Emperor Justinian or perhaps the Pope, according to various legends. There are many stories that sort of have the consistent theme, if not entirely contradictory. And the black man at the bottom is either an Ethiop or a Moor, or an Arab, and but the attributions are not so much racial as they are sort of religious exile. So the sense of otherness or alienness is carried forward in some of what this painting represents. My connections with it, first of all, immediately leapt through the centuries to Frederick Douglass and his sense of amputation in stealing his own body from slavery. As he put it, this limb, these arms, this head that he stole from his master and sort of reconnected as he removed his body from the civil death of slavery and became something like a reunited body, an autonomous body in some sense. It also made me think of the Dred Scott decision and the description in that case of Dred Scott having been escaping to the free territory of Illinois, Wisconsin, and in the lawsuit, in the Supreme Court case, it's described as Dred Scott saying, he was assaulted by his slave master's his owner's so-called representative in taking him, putting him in shackles and taking him back. But he used the word that he was assaulted. The Supreme Court said, no, he wasn't assaulted. He was gently restrained and shipped back to his master. And that language, the gentle restraint, so reminded me of the way they described my cat being restrained when United Airlines once lost my cat. So it was literally like the language of UPS bailment. I mean, it actually invoked the language of bailment in law under the Uniform Commercial Code, that this was a thing that was gently wrapped up in bubble wrap and sent back. It was the same division in language that one saw in the Margaret Garner case, which is the basis for the novel Beloved. And in the actual transcript and the newspaper accounts of Margaret Garner's capture, Margaret Garner was the woman who, with whom everybody's probably now much more familiar than they were when she wrote this, when Toni Morrison wrote the book. Was the slave who escaped from her owner, Archibald Gaines, fled across the river from Kentucky into Ohio, and then when under the Fugitive Slave Act, the slave catchers were at the door. She attempted to kill all three of her children, killed one, and in the trial that was proposed, the abolitionist representatives of her cause attempted to have her tried for murder, because to be tried for murder was a recognition of her full humanity, that she could then assert the mitigating circumstances of Archibald Gaines having allegedly raped her and the mistreatment that she would face if she went back. In sending her back under the Fugitive Slave Act, she had no claim to be anything other than, again, cargo, freight, the object of a contract, the commodity who was sent back, and again this language of how they had to handle her gently to make sure that she got back there and to her owners. And but that shift in language then made me think, and I'll sort of stop here and I'll just read that last part of it. This is from the first chapter. It made me think of one of the weirder legal cases that this entire painting made me think about. Involved a South Carolinian named John Wood, whose leg was amputated after an airline crash in 2004. And the subsequent saga is recorded in a sad, funny, very Southern Gothic little film called Finders Keepers. And if you've seen that, it's a very weird film. I highly recommend it. It's available on Netflix or Amazon. I'll summarize it here. Desiring to be eventually buried as a bipedal entity, Wood had had his leg embalmed, and he embalmed it himself, and placed it in a storage unit with other belongings. But then he fell behind in the rental fees, and the contents of the unit were sold at auction in literally one of those television things of Storage Wars. And it was sold to one Shannon Wisnant, who found the leg carefully wrapped and nestled inside a barbecue smoker, a Weber grill. Now, Wisnant called the police, who traced it back to Wood, and once they discovered it wasn't a murder or a dismemberment, Wisnant, then said, okay, well, it's my leg. And Wood, in turn, insisted that his leg be returned to him. And of course, this provokes the question of possession, the notion, what do we mean when we say my leg? Wisnant disagreed, noted that the law recognized him to be the good faith purchaser for value, as we say in contract law. Because, and he wanted actually, he hoped to put the leg on display in a homemade house of horrors, and he was going to charge money for it. So again, the commodification of the leg provided a legal, the grounds for claiming a legal remedy. And he said, Halloween's just around the corner. This is his explanation. Now, this case of Wood versus Wisnant suggests how the language of habits of rigid contractarianism can clash with the ethics of care and broader public interest. John Wood's lost leg is a nearly irresistible subject for allegorizing, uniting as it does, dilemmas over everything that makes communion, community, and cohesion possible: family, market, and language itself. Shannon Wisnant might have been legally right, but effectively wrong when he referred to Wood's leg as his embodied property. My extra foot, he kept calling it. And like any good businessman, he was careful to point out that by purchasing the smoker and its contents with legal tender, he had incorporated them into his estate, status, profile, and profit. To top it off, he actually created a brand for himself. He became known as the Footman. To Wood, however, the leg was part of me, not separable as a leg, but indivisible from himself, or his body, or his spirit. It lay beyond commercial exchange, in sacred terrain. Its amputation was a symbolic as well as a physical loss, and the bony relic was a palpable memorial to the moment he lost it, in the plane crash that had also killed his father, and the leg removed from the body, of which it was formerly an integral part, was a remainder of the day and the marker of a grave. And the ghoulishness of this situation should not obscure the legal issues at stake should a commodity interest in the contents of the storage locker override the sacrosanctity of corporal integrity. Are discarded body parts alienable in contract, or do they fall within the realm of what we deem inalienable under the contract, under the Constitution, under the Constitution? And so that's where this book begins, and I go on to, everything from Ted Williams's body being, cryopreserved in a tank somewhere, to the debates around what's happening in Alabama about whether cryopreserved embryos, which really have been analyzed with the same sense of extreme sacrosanctity of life that literally gives the moment of conception a kind of holiness that is challenging to many of us because they're like, a bubble of a molecule. But the degree to which I have trouble distinguishing them for some purposes, for some philosophical senses, from what's at stake in the protection of everything from what's at stake in this to what's at stake in the Margaret Garner case to what's at stake today in the pushing of more and more what used to be constitutional protections in the sense of civic vivacity and how much of our law pushes those domains into pure contractarianism in the name of hyper-libertarianism and particularly to me the significance of this is not just about slavery anymore, it's also about the very shifting power of people who can purchase the fate of all of us in ways that used to be part of our collective discussion of governance. But what happens when the very powerful tech bros can literally buy whole geographies and create new systems of governance, bury it in systems of artificial intelligence or sort of online manipulations where we find ourselves, our political expression is repackaged and disguised as I have an example that I'll end with, which is when Jeff Bezos stepped off Blue Origin and said, William Shatner, who was given a write-up, said, you have given me the greatest gift of my life. This is the most wonderful thing in the world. And he said it in that individual sense. It was literally like, you have given me this transactional gift, as opposed to what happened, in the when somebody landed on the moon, this is one great step for mankind. It was a collective language, and so a lot of this book is about the contractarianism of the individualizing contractarian language with which that collective civic sense of mankind or womankind or personkind has been increasingly or perhaps utterly displaced. So I'll stop there.
I'm not sure everyone knows you're a professor of contract law.
Yes.
And
In case you didn't
yet
know that.
much of your work, maybe most of your work, a lot of your work, is about the limits and misapplication of contract law.
Yeah.
You wrote about that in the very first article of yours I read on being the object of property, the 1988 article in Signs. And then
that was the article I wrote here in Dartmouth.
Oh, really?
That was the first part of, the very first thing I ever wrote that wasn't a law review article, like a refinancing by any other name. That was literally the article I wrote before. But that was on being the object of property, and I wrote it here, that summer.
And then that article was
Barbara Johnson's.
incorporated.
I was in Barbara Johnson's seminar.
Did you know each other then?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's
way back when.
These
Okay.
friendships go back a long way. Yeah.
And that got incorporated into The Alchemy of Race and Rights.
It's the last chapter, but it was the first thing I wrote in that book.
It just which changed how many of us thought about, everything. And in this book, a theme that's reprised in really every chapter is, as you write in chapter 3, that matters that used to be the province of constitutional discourse have been downsized and outsourced and pushed into the realm and discourse of private contract. Private schooling, private prisons, pay to play for what used to be thought of as public goods, public utilities, public spaces, including fire departments and parks. That kind of sub-transactionalism changes the nature of both the thing being exchanged in contract as well as we, who are supposedly constitutionally autonomous agents. And I want to encourage you to say more about this, that how contract law that was developed for things but not persons, and yet it's been continued to be applied to persons and increasingly in the digital age.
Yeah.
We're being reduced to things, to commodities, our attention is being sold to advertisers, as we use search engines, communicate on social media, make online purchases, and our data, including highly personal, formerly private data, is being extracted from us without our consent or even our awareness. And then conversely, things, corporations, are being treated like persons, as in Citizens United. But back to this thingification of real persons, you talk about why that isn't, why most people take it to be a violation of our autonomy, of our very personhood. And that's because we're said to agree to all of it. right? We consent. And I love how you write about this. This is on page 116. That the supposed notice and consent proffered by the I agree buttons we press to access any given platform is woefully ineffective as a mechanism of imparting anything like choice. Yet the empty assurance of choice is the vocabulary used to justify information gathering practices about everything, from our voting practices to bathroom habits to musical tastes to blood pressure and sleep patterns. And all of this can be sold. But moreover, because these giant social media platforms aren't state actors, we can't, as you put it, easily summon the same causes of action against them for censorship or denial of public accommodation. As private, corporate, profit-seeking businesses, they're responsible only to their shareholders. And this is what I want to stress. If we decline their terms of service, we're caught in a double bind. A voluntary choice that involuntarily excludes us from basic life necessities: credit cards, cell phones, banking transactions, workplace duties, insurance, credit rating, schooling, shopping, health services, and housing. And I'd like to ask you how we can avoid this double bind, but a double bind is by definition unavoidable. I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's a situation where there's no satisfactory option, no way out. But I'm wondering if you could say something about the ways in which society must change in order for us to be able to get out of this double bind.
I mean, for me, it's all about the language, and that's why I got sort of, because my field is contract. I'm so aware of the way contract as a body of law was carefully constructed out of language to apply to things. Everything had to be fungible, the remedies, but that's why this leg in the John Wood case, for example, it changes, it becomes a thing in, when it is, legal tender in exchange for value. But it becomes a connected, almost spiritual entity, but it is part of, it's valued in a very different way. It has a value, we call our bodies priceless when we are treating them in the context of the Constitution, in the context of full, citizenship. It's beyond price. It's why we don't sell body parts. It's why we don't, supposedly sell blood. I mean, we do, but we're not supposed to use that. We use donorship as the language, even when it's not. And so for me, the language is very, very important, but that language goes back to a very intentional set of boundaries imposed, particularly in the American context, during the time of slavery. And this was a conscious decision. The degree to which it sort of metastasized to every transaction and every encounter is what I find most alarming. And in technology, I think that it's been a slow, but nevertheless extraordinarily rapid encroachment on how we think about each other, because we traded in, all of us, I agree, for efficiency, for speed, for something Paul Virilio, he writes about speed in politics, but it is really about the idea that you'll be able to do everything so much faster and so much more efficiently. But efficiency itself is the language of a kind of libertarianism that abstracts the human being into a piece or a part or a function, a mechanical function, rather than... And so I do think that this goes back to something that you and I began in our earliest conversations that I find in your book, which is that I think that this new technology and its language and its rule of our lives, which is hyper surveying. I mean, I lost my cell phone last week, and for a week I couldn't get into my bank account, I couldn't get into my online, I couldn't get into my Canvas at school because everything is Duo, insured, and it's I found myself dispossessed. I was back in my body and it was really peaceful and calm. But I was also on an island all by myself. I was completely disconnected by the things I had to do to make a living. And I do think that the way in which it alters our lives, it interrupts our memories in lots of ways, and it deranges time, and it's it's we talked a little bit about a form of human experimentation about how we interact. It directs our emotions in lots of ways, and I think that among my students, they're when they're online, they're connected with everything that's happening in the present, but there is no past, and they forget the past. I mean, I think that's part of what worries me so much about Donald Trump. We can't remember what he did during his last presidency. It just doesn't stick. We can't remember what Biden did that is good, because everything is so much in the present tense. And not just is it in the present tense, it's in a kind of false present tense, because a lot of the temporal ordering of the internet and of AI and of everything, of the world we're living in, is about risk assessment. So it's really a future-looking gaze that breaks everything we do into, algorithmic, computational risks, and then it builds it into a model of how it should advise us or direct us, or what particular chat groups get enforced or not enforced, and that risk model really is about taking the potential of future and putting it in the present tense as though we're living in almost like a perpetual subjunctive. And when I read about in your work and in Marianne's work about how trauma works on the brain, there is some of the same sense of you're looking around for the alarm of what might have may have happened in the past, but increasingly the focus is on what could happen in the future, and it's all sort of a dark possibility that must be avoided. And that's that's an enclosure. It's and I think it accounts for some of the what Ashim Membe calls we're increasingly building a honeycomb of divisions from one from the other with checkpoints. We're always looking around with checkpoints of where we go, and that's a very I think the capacity of this technology to amplify that as a state of being is vaulting us into almost a perpetually traumatized state of mind. If that, I may be overstating it or misapplying the insights of your book, but it does make me feel like it's why we're so on edge all the time, and why everybody is so wary and so hostile, and so divided from one another. I don't know.
I'm perpetually distracted, and I don't know. It doesn't increase our efficiency. It doesn't increase my efficiency. I was doing much better in my job before all of this stuff, but it makes the profit is being made more efficiently for these big tech companies.
Well, it's not just profit. I mean, it's the surveillance of this. It does remind me of the way in which this is, everything is watched. I mean, our computers, at least my university, or the last several universities that I've been at, they front load computers. If you buy a computer, it's so much cheaper if you buy it through the university, but it's front loaded with surveillance capacity. Canvas is, it watches what you do. It's not supposedly police, but nevertheless, if everybody is acting like a police function, when you're in a property relationship, because what they're saying is that the university has a property interest in what you're doing, and you don't. It's still surveillance, and that form of policing, it seems to me, is really disabling, and it's disembodied, because it's and I said this last night, it's W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness. And double consciousness always acts as a stress on the body. That's why so many of us are so unhappy. But it feels like we have just amplified that dynamic as a social phenomenon, as a phenomenon of social media. We are always looking at ourselves through the eyes of somebody else, and that's a perpetual state of alarm to some degree.
Yeah. Another theme that pervades this book is that of erasure, and the elimination of history, of the past, particularly the history of slavery, of Jim Crow, from school textbooks. And you talk about the recodification of critical race theory. Right, that in actual law is defined as, quote, anything that makes people feel guilty, shamed, and or blamed, makes white people feel that way.
That's the Florida law, and,
That's the
and
Florida.
increasing numbers of state laws. Yes,
Yeah.
that is actually the language of the law. Yeah.
The Florida's
Florida,
22 Stop
Texas.
Woke law.
Stop woke. Yeah, but
Yeah.
many states have picked it up under various names and numbers.
Yeah. And in your book, you quote Toni Morrison, who wrote of the nightmare of the world of lost voices, where, as you put it, as though a whole universe is being written in invisible ink. And the importance of preserving these voices, these texts, these photographs. And I want to allow time for other people to ask questions, but I want to talk a bit about this marvelous last chapter, Gathering the Ghosts, in which you are creating an archive of your family's history to be housed in Radcliffe's Schlesinger Library. And there's some striking photographs in this. One of them is your apartment with dozens and dozens of boxes from your mother's home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
really it's a lot of stuff. Are you still going through all of this?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like dozens. I can't even count them.
No, there were 300 boxes.
300.
There were
Hundreds of
300
boxes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've given 72 to the Schlesinger thus far, but it requires going through and. But I inherited an extraordinary family history.
Yes.
From an extraordinarily interesting family, as it turns out, more interesting than I knew when I was growing up. And one of the things that I feel very, very lucky to have is that despite the trauma of most black families in the United States, they were pack rats. They collected everything. A lot of it is going to have to be thrown out. But they collected interesting things. And the moment cameras were invented, they picked up cameras and took pictures. So I have so many pictures of people who were born in slavery, to whom I'm related. And that's really unusual. And so that sense of having been entrusted with something like a family archive, and that's why actually Schlesinger came to me and said, you know, not many African American families have this photographic history. And also because, you know, there were so many anti-literacy laws. I mean, we're only going through the most recent iteration of that, but it was against the law to teach black people to read under slavery. And then the 90% of the litigation for civil rights began in black people, you know, trying to get educated, to get into schools, to integrate schools, you know, to have access to education. And my family, you know, they wrote everything down. They wanted to, you know, they were, you know, the numbers of just letters. Everybody wrote letters, and they kept those letters. That's sort of the amazing thing. I mean, you know, people kept those letters. They kept postcards. They kept where they had been, and so that's what I feel like I'm very lucky to have.
It's wonderful reading. It's something very comforting about it, about all this paper.
Well,
it's none of this. I mean, you don't talk about it being digitized. You're going through the photos and the texts and the letters.
It's so interesting. I have a friend. When I first moved to LA, when I first got out of law school, I had to escape New England as fast as I could. So I went to LA, which is as far as I could get without jumping into the ocean. And I had some very good friends, and they remain very good friends, but their parents were this husband and wife, and I wrote about it in Alchemy. He had been a painter before the Nazis came, and no, he'd been an artist and a painter, and he never painted again in the same way. You know, after he came out of the camps, he came to LA. He was actually a costume designer, as I recall. And she took me to his garage, and there were all these incredible landscapes. And in every one of the landscapes, there was a human-shaped blank space. That he, and his wife, I remember she whispered to me, and he never finishes anything. And I'm saying, actually, I think it's the most complete expression of what the Nazis did. I mean, there was this blank space. And when my great aunt and my grandparents, these are really not they left me all these books, all these letters, all these photographs. I didn't know we had. It felt like I had a dream the night I started looking through this, in which my great-grandmother's, the one the 11-year-old who'd been raped by the master, her face suddenly appeared to me. I don't have a photograph of her, but her face became entirely clear to me. It was like it came to me completely. And I'm in a reading group and we're reading Octavia Butler's Fledgling, and there's a lot of discussion about whether fledgling is really the body of a sexualized 10 or 11-year-old, because she's very small, but actually in the novel she's a 50-year-old vampire. Vampires have longer lives. So there's all this description of what her body represents in science fiction, that she's a child but yet an adult, and that she's being sexualized in this story. And I felt it as literally as a collective traumatic memory that Octavia Butler was expressing in a lot of her work, and I felt like Octavia Butler had, those of us who've been through certain histories, that even if you don't remember it specifically, even if you don't have the archive and the pictures, that there is something that re-expresses itself over the generations, and that's why, again, Marianne's expression of post-memory is so powerful to me, because it gave me words to express that moment in which it wasn't just crazy. I'm not just hallucinating the face of my great-grandmother. This was something that actually brought it back into my own body in a way that I needed to write about. So.
And one of the photos I'm really struck by in this chapter is of the 4 black doctors sitting next to one another, eating watermelon. This was your paternal grandfather and
my grandfather,
Margaret,
his daughter, my aunt, my father's sister, her husband, and one of their classmates, one of my aunt's classmates. They were all graduates of medical. My grandfather was a doctor, and then that generation.
And you think the photo among family was something to laugh about.
Yes. Yeah.
But in the archive, it may have to stand alone. Although luckily, you were able to tell its story, so people can refer to that and contextualize it.
But they're standing there, they're holding large pieces of watermelon. And, but it was, on the family, it was, ha ha ha, we're mocking it, and they were all dressed up, my
three-piece
suit, all of that, and they're holding these slices of watermelon. And it was a response to the stereotypes.
Yeah.
But, in depositing it, I held it back, until I could put it in the book.
Yeah.
Because I was just so afraid it was just going to be misread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think that the data that's being extracted from us, that you write about, is also it's being decontextualized and used for often nefarious purposes. Deep fakes and AI constructed doppelgangers, and I mentioned yesterday this phenomenon I just learned about recently of death bots. A chat bot that's created with generative AI that draws on data such as text messages, voice messages, emails, social media posts, texts of other kinds, to imitate the writing or the speech of a person now deceased. So as with ChatGPT, you give it a prompt and it produces a response that resembles what that deceased person would have actually said. And they already exist. They're already being used. They usually are based on text, but sometimes they have audio inputs and outputs. And I imagine this strikes you, as it strikes me, as deeply creepy, turning a person's life into digital remains, into a mere thing. And I'm not sure how to articulate just what's wrong with that. So I want to ask you, why is that wrong? Why is that way of preserving someone's memory after life? Why do we find this so creepy?
I think it's a way of not accepting the limits of life. And it feels that the interference with the cycle, or the inability to accept the cycle of life, is a weird form of eugenics. And so, you know, I have the same feeling about Ray Kurzweil trying to extend it forever, or Elon Musk saying that he must have 10 or 12 children in order to, you know, to project himself into the future. There's this sense of the body as a particular kind of property that you can control and project either from the past or into the future in a way that centers on the notion of control, you know.
Yes.
And that's what bothers me, or it's the inability to deal with loss, or, you know, and that inability to deal with loss, I think, is related. I mean, this, I may be totally wrong, but to me it feels wrong because it's related to the question of obedience and how you make the body conform in some ways that again is deeply tied to the power to predict and the control over the power of prediction. And so in some ways when you say that, it reminds me both of the videos that some people embed on tombstones, you know, but even that is, you know, in Los Angeles, this is a more popular thing than
I haven't seen that in
and you
New
will
England.
find in New England. But in Los Angeles, you'll see these gravestones with little videos embedded in them, of, you know, from the high, you know, or little, you know, the high points of somebody's life, and, you know, it's a, you know, I you know, it's why do I keep these archives? To keep people close to me. So this is why we all do this to some degree.
Yeah.
But the point at which it becomes something like, or becomes something really unhealthy in terms of an obedience, this is what you must do, or I'm going to start over again, is when you start cloning people, you know, or you clone your pets, or you clone your dogs, or if they're not good dogs, then you do what Christine Ohm did, you know, like to poor Cricket. You know, it's like bad dog didn't, you know, bad bird dog. Therefore, you start over again. You get another one. You know, there's something about the commodification of bodies that doesn't accept the limits of what it means to be a living creature, a changing creature, a disobedient creature, and it's so it there's something punishing about it, and that's what I feel is.
Thank you. I knew you would have the words to explain why I think this is so deeply creepy. We have about 10 minutes. Questions? Whoa, that hand went right up.
Well, you were talking about like ownership of a leg, who it actually belongs to. In my work, I don't know, have you read Kashmir Hill's book, Your Face Belongs to Us? Well,
No.
so there's a lot of AI, and what they've done is they've scraped billions of images of people, us, and all of our metadata, and they can do facial recognition software.
Yeah.
They've sold it, right? Because there is only one state in the country has a biometric protection law, and that's Illinois. So all of our data has been sold to other companies all over the world who are buying AI. So our biometric data, our identity, no longer belongs to us.
Right.
And one of the things, and do we have any recourse on that? Because that is already out in the world in places we don't know or don't approve. We have no idea. And one of the things that I've been writing about as of late is one of the biggest ways that they're using now deepfake is for revenge porn.
Yeah.
You don't like your teacher, you get her face, you create this thing, and these apps are being sold to children for free. I mean, sorry, they're not even being sold. And then kids are creating these things, and it's really, you know, it's sort of like we no longer control our own identity. We don't have our identity.
It's
anymore.
one of the major concerns I have about all of this is precisely the tech industry, where somebody like Elon Musk gets $45 billion salary, or that he's almost on the, somebody is saying, well, he, you know, if only, you know, he weren't such a schmuck, he'd be close to a trillionaire. And this means that he can really buck all kinds of governance. And that my biggest concern for the last 20 years is there has been no viable control.
Yeah.
And so you have this enormous monopoly, and now
It's a Pandora's box. It's out already.
yeah.
It's
I mean,
out.
there's no way. I mean, so all the laws against child pornography, the laws of patent, the laws of copyright, the laws, all of this is supposedly in a great soup. Sorry, a great soup. It's in a great soup that literally the tech companies they can ladle out or govern or not govern as they like, but it's very hard to put into law now because it's so.
And then you worry, like, if Donald Trump were to come,
well,
become president,
you don't worry,
he
you
wanted
know.
to get revenge on everybody who said something bad about him in a rally. You can identify who that person
Well,
is.
I mean, it's and this was some of what we were talking about yesterday in Susan's class. That's why I worry about Governor Hochul of New York passing or wanting to pass a law that prevents the wearing of masks or the wearing of baklavas. And this is a freighted history because it was also an argument against Ku Klux Klan hoods. I mean, it's not just, but it's also being used in states, and China is identifying people who don't wear masks, or they can do facial recognition, including ears. They can tell by your ears, even if the rest of your face is. There are makeup artists who wear, there's a whole science or art of making up so that it baffles the cameras. But it seems to me that at heart, it's a lack of governance.
And it is in creating the technology
yes.
and then releasing it without any kind of control. Sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to.
No, but it's yeah.
Anybody else have any comments, questions? Maybe you think so. Go ahead.
So many questions. I guess if we're talking about commodification and ownership, the way you've been writing, sort of against the idea of contract law and commodification, the answer to that legally seems to be autonomy. And you've also been writing against the idea of autonomy and more about interconnection and care and the ethics of care. And so, but that legally, that doesn't quite hold. So.
Yeah, no.
It seems to be a conundrum here, or
it's
contradiction.
It's a comment about the way in which, I mean, it's really a commentary, and I should be more specific about what my concerns. It's not simply that we want everything to be in the discourse of American constitutional law, which does have a certain kind of ideal of interconnectedness. It's not that I want everything to be in the discourse of a body of law like contract, which has a very particular kind of autonomy at stake, which is that it's called will theory, and it's your will, and that's what it makes as the rule of law, as between the two transactors. And it's not. There are other theories of autonomy that are like sound price. So that you can't sell something for example, if I wanted to sell you these glasses and you said I'll pay you $5 for them, that's contract says that's fine. It's between us. If I've said I want to charge $100 for them, contract would say that. But if you said I want to sell them for $1 million, older theories of contract law, even in the United States, would say no, there's a sound price for this, and you're going beyond that. So there's some social boundary on what that price would be, on how you price things. And as you go from almost an Aristotelian, value, there's, contract says that it's only for those, and that's why it's for things. It thingifies it, because it's only for those things that individuals should have legislation over. So it's only about those things that we should have will. And when you move to tort, for example, it's not just the will of the parties who are to the contract, it includes a certain responsibility to those who have not been in contract with you. But if I don't shovel my driveway, I should have taken best efforts. I should have I have an obligation to anticipate reasonable efforts to make the world safe for those who come into my realm, even if I haven't agreed with them. And then if I'm in a criminal situation, it's not simply that I should have taken reasonable efforts. I am the ethic of criminal law is the entire geography of the public, and therefore you're punished based on you're punished from the perspective of the public geography that you have endangered. That's one of the arguments about victims' rights, for example, is that it isn't tort. You're not awarding, you're not punishing somebody by how much, they have injured a particular person. It's how much they've injured the entire public geography, and that's why you put them in jail. You take them out of the entire social setting. Whereas in tort, you simply give them the amount of money, or you repair what is, in that smaller geography of what could be reasonably governed by negligence or property loss. But again, criminal law and then constitutional law is it governs a geography even larger than that of living creatures where the harm to them may be irrevocable, or it affects their ability to really live. And then, when we talk about human rights, it's really beyond the United States. That's why, when Alito, when he says the human rights are foreign rights, it really is it's a dismissal of the history of human rights, which is the post-World War II value of this larger collective that says it is an international obligation to others. It doesn't simply end at the boundary of a nation state. It extends to all humanity, ecological rights, those sorts of things. So you can view it in that that sense of hierarchy. But there are lots of ways to weight this. I do it as a critique of the American system, but I think that it really has implications far beyond. I'm not somebody who believes that contract is the only way or the only model of autonomy that's at stake, and that it's much slushier, it's much more porous, and we go in and out of these various states of how the law should affect us and in what situations it should affect us. And it becomes rigid and authoritarian when you're only, a contractor in the way that Christopher Columbus Langdell designed it in the late 1800s, and you forget all of does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about, I'm a historian, so that's the frame that I'm thinking in. I'm thinking about how the body has regularly been commodified in the interests of damage to the body, and that the law looks at recompense for damage to the body, and we count on the law to do that for us, and it looks to damage to the heart, damage to the soul as well, and compensation for that. So there's a commodification. I'm trying to see where the line is crossed in what you're talking about. It's interesting where you're asking us to think, and because it seems to me that we've counted on the law to do this for us in a lot of ways, and now we're seeing that there's a bridge too far. We seem to have crossed it. We're not sure where, and that's the line that I'm trying to understand. And
well, there is no one line. And
that's the problem.
And I guess I posit this, and I should really be very clear that I'm speaking as a lawyer, and it's a critique of law. But it's also true that law has multiple systems of damage. And so the word damages has many more meanings than simply the law is going to. We don't generally in law recognize damage to heart and soul. We just don't. And so we do. Which are almost never given. It's those are called exceptional damages, actually. So if even no matter how much it's actually if you damage the body, it's literally calculated by the hospital costs. It's calculated by some metric that is quite material, and yes, we commodify it, but it isn't the soul. No body of law really returns a soul, except when you get to things like possibly constitutional law, where we recognize things like stigma. And stigma doesn't have a price on it, and that's why it's so resisted. That's why it's so hard to calculate, what a loss of civil rights means. What is the cost of civil death? And we can say, what are reparations for slavery? What are the reparations for the Holocaust? I mean, these are harder damages, but they're in this much wider moral universe, and we use different vocabulary for that. So we have punitive damages for intentional harm. For example, if you actually poison somebody, you have punitive damages. You have criminal damages, which may be inflicted on your body, but it's not an eye for an eye. We don't have that system, but that could be another system. But we don't have that system generally in either civil or criminal law. It is either to there's repair, there's rehabilitative. You build something back to where it was. It's you keep people out of the social world so they can't do it again. There are multiple ways of calculating this. But the stuff we'd all like to see is how to address the most traumatic injuries of all, which are war injuries, for example, what's happening in the world now. That repercussive, oceanic sense of loss that exists, again, if you imagine it as a concentric circle, on the outer realms. That's it seems to me that in a world that's densely populated, where there is no place really to escape, and where wars are proliferating, I worry that we don't have the vocabulary in our court systems to address it, and the attempt at things like the ICC or the accords that came out after World War II, which are now sort of being just tossed to one side, where we have now systems of law or governance, which are increasingly infiltrated by ethics of the Great Replacement theory, which really are about competitive life, who has the right to live or not, and that as an increase as a valued as a positive ethic is what scares me to death about this moment, and about its appeal and its expression in this globalized sense of exporting through our technology. That's.
Okay, well, one more. We have done.
I'm sorry, I'm
a little out of time. Yes.
As a lawyer,
Oh,
what would you say the future of law is?
sorry. No.
What's the
Oh,
future
sorry.
of law in a society in a world where technology has created a parallel universe?
Yeah, I mean,
What's the future of law?
I wish people would ask that question directly and more, because when somebody like Elon Musk says, I'm moving to Mars because there is no law of Mars. There is a space law. We have law. I mean, what he's suggesting is a metaphor and actually a lawlessness on Earth. And that's what he has projected and stated in so many ways. And the abandon of law and his attempt, and I mentioned this for those of you who were there last night, I know, but I'm going to repeat it, that the sort of extrapist vision that has been put forward by people like Patricia Friedman, by Peter Thiel, by the abandon of ethical systems, not just laws, but the ethical systems. I mean, it's what really disheartens me about what's happening at the Washington Post, that there were, the conversations we have about the guidelines, the guardrails of how we conduct ourselves professionally as well as in our governance, seem to be all up for sale. And that's what, Will Lewis is the new director, is somebody who, follows the Fleet Street model of, you buy your way into past confidences, you buy your way over and around fiduciary relations. And, Elon Musk is buying up whole geographies, introducing new currencies, new systems of governance that are analogous to his notion of a self-driving car. It reminds me, and I mentioned this in the book, of this weird Australian farmer who made a name for himself. Called himself the Prince of Hut. He had 800,000 acres in Australia. He was a wheat farmer, and he declared he didn't want to pay taxes. So he set himself up as a principality. And he set up a post office, and he called himself, and he named his wife Princess Shirley. And he got away with it because it became a kind of tourist attraction. And it was a big joke until he died, and then he had to pay the taxes. But there are a lot of the extrapist tech brothers, Seasteading, for example, or China's doing it too, but it violates our notion of I suppose all things have to come to an end, but of the fraying of the nation state, the bounds of diplomacy and engagement with each other as polities. And instead, there are these alternate corporate entities that are accountable to no one but themselves.
By design, by Section 230.
Yes, we were talking about that yesterday too.
We could continue talking about this for a very, very long time, but I just want to thank you. We all want to thank you for the gift of your presence.
I want to take a moment to push Susan's book, but it was just reissued, and it's important to put that out there too.
Thank you. Will there be books up here or out there?
There are books for sale right up here, and then come back, or you're welcome to come up here, whichever you would be most comfortable.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be so long.
Sorry.
I am long-winded.
I was pointing at you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just had something small. It was